Okay, welcome everyone to Spiritual Geography of the Land of Israel. We're continuing our series. Last week, for those who were here or listened later, we began talking about the four holy cities of Israel. And last week we got through three of them: Tzfat, Tiberia, and Hebron. That leaves us with probably the most important one, and for that we need an entire class, and that is the holy city of Yerushalayim. We mentioned that this concept of four holy cities is not really an ancient idea. It's something much more contemporary. Each of these cities, of course, is holy. Other places in Israel are holy also. But this concept of four holy cities relatively is just a few hundred years old. But Yerushalayim, being referred to as Ir HaKodesh, goes all the way back to the Tanakh. Even in the words of the prophets, already Yerushalayim is called the holy city. And so tonight we are going to be looking at Yerushalayim, and I'll remind everyone that this series is called the Spiritual Geography of the Land of Israel. So we're not going to be discussing in general the history of Jerusalem or different events that happened. We are looking at the geography of Eretz Yisrael. We may mention a number of incidences or stories from the Tanakh, but that is not the purpose of this series of classes. As much as possible, we are just trying to understand the spiritual geography of the land of Israel, the four holy cities, the agriculture, the reality of water and rain, the mountains, the valleys, everything that we've been learning about. So we have mentioned, I think probably the first thing we mentioned in the series is this idea of Israel being in the center of the world. That is its geographical reality. And we discussed this from many different aspects, from the ancient trade routes to religion to today, oil. Israel's just always been in the middle, but that's the geographical reality, is that Israel sits between Africa, Asia, and Europe. So it's very, very centrally located. But tonight, we're going to go like one step deeper, call it the more inner dimension, is that the center of Israel is Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim is the heart and soul of the Jewish people from really the time of Avram, and even before, where we have the Midrashim of Adam and Chava. Adam and Eve came to Israel, and some say even dwelt on the Temple Mount. Noah came and offered a sacrifice. Avram, Akedah, Yitzchak. Yaakov comes and has his dream of the ladder on the Temple Mount. And so we're just making it more focused that the center of the world is Israel, and the center of Israel is Jerusalem. And the center of Jerusalem is the Temple Mount. And the center of the Temple Mount is the temple. And the center of the temple is the Holy of Holies. And so that's how we understand the central geographical reality of Israel. So really, it's starting from the Holy of Holies. And according to tradition, the Holy of Holies was set up over a stone. And this stone is called Even HaShetiya, the foundation stone, or it comes also from the idea of watering. And we'll learn shortly this idea that all, in a sense, all the waters of the world have their source in the water that is under the Temple Mount. And so this rock, it's still there to this day. The Golden Dome, the mosque, is situated over the Even HaShetiya. Why did they put a mosque there? Because that's where the temple was. Despite the fact that they try to deny that there was ever a temple there, the reality is that's why they built the mosque there, is because the temple was there. So here we see smaller and smaller central points. And according to some midrashim, literally, not just the center of the world, but the center of creation comes from this point called the Even HaShetiya. That is the central place of all creation. We could almost say that this is the place of the Big Bang. This is the inception of creation. And because of this midrash, whether we take it literal or figurative, that is why the temple ends up being over the Even HaShetiya, is because this idea that it is the center of the world. And there's a concept called a vortex of energy, that different peoples in different places on the planet have traditions that there are places that are called vortexes of energy, where energy is, as it were, funneled into a certain place. So we have the same concept, but our belief is that the center vortex of the world is quite literally the Temple Mount, the temple, and the Holy of Holies. People who come to the Kotel, many people have a real experience of feeling this energy vortex, a surge of energy that's present in that holy place. Another name that is given to Jerusalem it's called like the navel of the world. Again, this idea that it's the middle of not just earth, but even creation. And that's why we have this idea that the temple below is situated directly under the what's called Yerushalayim Shel Mala, the Beit HaMikdash Lamala, God's throne of glory. I believe we discussed that. But this is the idea that this vortex of energy is connected to the idea that the lower Jerusalem, the earthly Jerusalem, is situated under the throne of glory, under Yerushalayim Shel Mala. Okay, I just want to point out the book I'm using here, and I will be referring to it because it's way too much for me to memorize all of this. It doesn't really have a cover, but it's called Legends of Jerusalem, by Ze'ev Vilnay, Vilnay. I've had this book for like 50 years, and I haven't looked at it in like probably 49 years. But I found it incredibly helpful. And it's everything is sourced, and it's really a tremendous book. It may still be possible to get it on Amazon. It's called Legends of Jerusalem. Ze'ev Vilnay. Okay, so I mentioned that the Even HaShetiya is sometimes called the watering rock or the drinking rock. In modern Hebrew, a drink is called shtiyah. Well, that's connected to this rock. And so there are many, many traditions about this. And one of them is, as I mentioned, that the source of water in a certain way of the entire world is under the Temple Mount. That's why in the future, it mentions in Zechariah that after Mashiach comes, a river will flow out of the Temple Mount. And it says that it will sweeten all the waters in the world. Now, actually, in the Gemara, it talks about that in the beginning, it will come out like this little rivulet of water, but it will continue to grow and grow and grow until it's this huge river, and it will sweeten all of the waters of the world, including flowing down to the Dead Sea, the lowest place on earth, the Salt Sea, and will sweeten the waters. Others understand it more metaphorically, because we have a verse that says, Ki mitzion teitzei Torah, u'devar Hashem Yerushalayim. Because from Zion will come the Torah, and from Yerushalayim, the word of God. Every time we take out the Torah for a public reading, those are the words we say. Ki mitzion teitzei Torah u'devar Hashem Yerushalayim. So many people understand that this river, because remember, as we've learned many times, ein mayim ela Torah. Anytime water is mentioned, it's an allusion to Torah itself. And so this river coming out of Yerushalayim could be a physical river, and at the same time, a spiritual meaning of Torah coming out of Yerushalayim. Now, if anyone has taken what is called the tunnel tours, which goes under or around the Kotel, know that there is water under there. You can see it in the walls. There's actually a pool of water that you go by. I did it not that long ago. I had not done it in many years. There's a whole pool of water. It's a known thing that there is water under there. And so one of the traditions is that, let me just get it here. Just one second. Oh, here it is. Okay. So the tradition is that it's not just that there is water under there, there's a whole abyss. There's a whole abyss under the Temple Mount. And so one of the traditions is when David HaMelech, he was the one who bought the Temple Mount. And later God tells Shlomo, the place that David bought, that is the place of the temple. And David understood that. And so he, around the Even HaShetiya, David began to dig. And he dug very, very deep. Some say 1,500 cubits. He dug deep into the earth. And what happened was that when he got to a certain place, the waters started to rise. And they came all the ways up to the Temple Mount. And David was afraid it was going to flood the world, because he had felt that he had plugged into the very source of the waters of the whole world. And so, according to tradition, he began to sing the songs of ascent. And little by little, the waters receded. And so this is one of the traditions. Another tradition is he wrote the name of God on a stone. As the waters were about to, he thought, flood the world, he wrote the divine name on it, and he threw it into the abyss, and they subsided. So this is, again, it's written in the Talmud, and so this is one of the ideas about these waters that exist under the Temple Mount. And as like I said, until this day, they can be seen and felt under the Temple Mount. Okay, continuing. And as I said, the Even HaShetiya, the watering stone, is right above this place of the abyss, the navel of the world, the central point of the creation. Okay, so now one of the things we've been doing as we learn about different cities or different mountains, so we want to understand the meaning of the Temple Mount, the different names of the Temple Mount. The most important one is called HaMoriah. HaMoriah. And this actually is found in the book of Genesis, when God commands Avram to bring his son as an offering. He tells him that he should go to the land of Moriah. The land of Moriah. That is the Temple Mount. And when I say Temple Mount, it's very, very important to understand that it is a mountain. Now, the geography of Yerushalayim is that it's a series of hills or mountains in concentric circles that, depending where you are in Yerushalayim, you can see kind of like the rolling hills. Today you have houses, buildings, etc. But depending where you are, you can see the rolling hills that Jerusalem is built on. And they extend in every direction, especially east and west is very, very steep ascent to Yerushalayim. If you remember, the Dead Sea it's around a 15-mile ascension to Yerushalayim. And the same thing from the west, that when I drive to Yerushalayim, I drive from the west. And depending if you go on Highway 1 or Highway 443, it's around 20 minutes straight uphill. North to south is different because we've talked about this, the ridge that runs through the middle of Israel from up north, Shechem, Shiloach, to Beit El, Yerushalayim, and then south to Beit Lechem, Bethlehem, to Hebron. That's the spine of Eretz Yisrael. But they are also rolling hills, rolling mountains. And so all around Yerushalayim are these rolling hills. In the Zohar, it mentions that Yerushalayim is built on 12 stones, meaning really 12 mountains. And this is very, very important because when we're getting the topography of Yerushalayim, so we already discussed that in Micha and in Yeshayahu, Isaiah and Micah, they both talk about that at the end of days, all the people will flow into Yerushalayim, which is referred to as the top of the mountains. It's as if it's like really the Mount Everest of the world, because spiritually it is. And all the people will flow into it. And so the Zohar says that Yerushalayim is built around 12 stones. And these 12 stones are connected very, very much to the way that we camped and marched in the desert, with the Mishkan was the middle of the camp. The Kohanim and the Levim surrounded the Mishkan. And then in each of the four directions were three tribes. And that alignment was based on Yaakov when he died. So he instructed his children to march his coffin for burial in that same construct of three tribes in each of the directions following his coffin. And so also it said that when Yaakov had his dream, and it says that he put a rock under his head, or rocks around his head, there's a tradition that his head was on the Even HaShetiya. He was on the Temple Mount, and that was the rock that his head was placed on. And others say that he put actually 12 rocks around his head. So all of that, it's parallel constructs. Yaakov in his dream with 12 stones, Yaakov in his burial with the 12 tribes surrounding him, the way we camped in the desert, and the way Yerushalayim is constructed. So that's a very, very deep understanding of the spiritual geography of Yerushalayim. So now back to HaMoriah. So first of all, God instructs Avram to take Yitzhak to the land of Moriah. And according to tradition, the Akedah happens on the Temple Mount. But there he was traveling, and it says on the third day, he lifted his eyes and he saw the place from afar. So today in Yerushalayim, there's a place called the Tayelet. The Tayelet is when you're approaching Yerushalayim from the south. And so Avram was traveling from the south, and it says he lifted his eyes and he saw the place from afar. So for people who have been to Israel and maybe know what I'm talking about, if not, when you come to Jerusalem, you must go to the Tayelet, because according to tradition, Avram came over a hill. That's where the Tayelet. A Tayelet means a walking like trail. There, the entire view of Jerusalem opens up, and right in the middle is the Temple Mount. And so it's really a very spiritual feeling when you go to the Tayelet and you look out over most of Yerushalayim, especially ancient Yerushalayim, that this is the exact place where Avram came over the hill and he lifted up his eyes and he saw the place, meaning the Temple Mount, from afar. So we're going to go through a number of different possibilities of what this word HaMoriah, HaMoriah, means. So one of them is that it comes from the word for myrrh. In Hebrew, mor. Mor is it's an herb. It's one of the herbs that was in the Ketoret. And in English, it's myrrh, M-Y-R-R-H. In Hebrew, it's mor, HaMoriah, because that is the place where the incense would be burned in the temple. So one of its names is HaMoriah. Like I said, I'm going to give you a whole number of different possibilities. Moriah, or is light. And so Temple Mount, the temple, the Holy of Holies, this is where God's light shines out to the world. This is one of the meaning of the menorah in the temple, that it represents God's light that is shining out to the whole world. So Moriah has in it the same root as or. And then we have the idea of, it's also connected to the word yirah, Moriah, yirah. And that comes from when Avram brings up Yitzchak as an offering. So afterwards, Avram names the place, and he names it Hashem Yireh, that God will see. And then he says, and the Torah says, and to this day, in this mountain, God will be seen. So in other words, the way that Avram named it implies that it's God seeing, as if God is seeing the entire universe from the Temple Mount. And that's the place where God is seen. So the word Yirah is close to the word Moriah. And it's significant that it's Avram who gives the place the name. Now, Yira is also connected to Mora. Mora, one of the means is awe or fear. And so when the angel came and told Avram, don't touch Yitzchak, it says that the angel said, now God knows that you fear God, that you have awe of God. So Moriah also comes from the word yira, but here meaning awe or fear. Now, it's also connected to the same root as Torah. Moriah, Torah, because Torah comes from the word hora'ah. Hora'ah means instruction. So, Ki mitzion teitzei Torah. From Zion comes Torah and the word of God from Yerushalayim. So the instruction comes from this place. And then there's even one more. It's connected to Temura. Temura means an exchange. So what exchange are we talking about? After the angel stops Avram, so it says that Avram saw a ram in the thicket, and he offered up the ram instead of Yitzchak. And of course, the ram was caught by his shofar, by his horn. This is the secret of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. And so there was an exchange made, as it were, that the ram in exchange for Yitzchak. And then the last one, it goes back to the first one. We said that myrrh or more is one of the ingredients of the incense. And so in the Song of Songs, it ends. The last verse says, make haste, my beloved, and you should be like a gazelle or a young hart upon the mountains of spices, which is alluding to Harabait, to the temple. And this again is very significant. When Avram names the place Hashem Yireh, God will see. And then he says, on this mountain, God will be seen. So in the book of Devarim, it says that the eyes of God are on it, meaning the land of Israel, from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. That in other words, this, according to tradition, this is the place that God creates the world from. And this is the place where God's divine providence emanates from, because God's eyes are on it. Einei Hashem, Eretz, it's a land that God seeks out. That's how it begins. It's a land that God seeks out. The eyes of God are on it from the beginning of the year to the end. Okay. Okay, now we're going to start learning about the caves, the valleys, and the springs that surround Yerushalayim. So anyone who's been to Israel knows that there are caves everywhere, large and small, everywhere you go in Israel. For those who have been to my house, I quite literally have a cave right by the sidewalk that takes anyone to our house. There's a cave right there. It's quite amazing. Not everyone has a cave right by their front door, but I do have a cave. But Yerushalayim also has some very, very famous caves. And one of them is, and many people might have been there, is by the Damascus, what's today called the Damascus Gate. There is a huge cave. And this cave, a number of mentions in the Tanakh. And one of them, it's usually referred to as the cave of Tzidkiyahu. Tzidkiyahu, he was the last king of Yehuda before the destruction of the first temple. And as Nebuchadnezzar was completing his siege, so the king was advised, if you're going to escape, you're going to have to go now, because we're at the end. And so, this is written in the Tanakh, that Tzidkiyahu, so he was told, if you go in a certain cave, this cave, that there is the cave continues all the ways to Jericho. And Tzidkiyahu and his family escaped through this cave, and it continued all the way to Jericho, meaning it went downhill, like I throw out the number 15 miles, pardon me, I need to get the exact distance between Jericho and Jerusalem. But he traveled all the ways down to Jericho, and he got to the opening of the cave. But the problem was that there were Babylonian troops that happened to have been right there. When he comes out, they figure out that this is the king. And they capture him, and he was taken to Babylonia, and he was jailed. And in fact, those people who come to the Sunday class just 2 weeks ago, we learned about this. And he was in jail for 37 years. They actually poked out his eyes when they captured him. And after 37 years, for some reason, the king of Babylonia lets him out of jail, and actually treated him very nicely until he died. He never became king again. So to this day, this cave is called the cave of Tzidkiyahu, because by tradition, that is how he escaped. But this cave also has tremendous significance, because it's considered that many of the stones of the temple that Solomon built, Shlomo Melech built, were hewn in that cave. And it's a huge cave. I was in it once. It's huge. And of course, they don't let people continue after a certain while. But that a lot of the stones were actually hewn for the temple from that place. And so sometimes it's called King Solomon's quarries, because by tradition, that is where he got the stones. When you continue around the walls of the old city, the walls of the old city are built over this cave, around this cave. And if you continue towards the north, there is another cave, and that's called Yirmiyahu's cave. And in the book of Yirmiyahu, it talks about how he was arrested for his prophecies. He was warning them that destruction was going to follow if they continued to act in the ways that they were. Of course, the people didn't listen, and the king, of course, didn't want to hear this. Yirmiyahu was arrested and he was thrown in a pit. And this is in the book of Yirmiyahu. And according to tradition, it was in that cave that he was held like in jail until he almost died there. But they took him out and he survived. Okay, now we've been talking about different rolling mountains around Jerusalem. So we have the Temple Mount. And to show you, when you stand at the Kotel, so we have to understand that the Kotel was the retaining wall for the Temple Mount. And so the way we stand at the Kotel now, you look up and you see the top of the Kotel. Well, that's where the flat area of the Temple Mount begins. But for anyone who's been at the Kotel, there's a few shafts that they've dug, and one becomes aware that when we're standing at the Kotel, we're only standing at 1/3 of the Kotel. The other 2/3 goes all the way down. The wall once was all of that. Over the years, that valley was filled in with rubble and dirt and garbage, and until it got to the level that we're at now. And so here you see that when we talk about the Temple Mount, it really was a mount with a valley on both sides. The other side is a very, very historical valley called the Valley of Kidron. And it lies between the Mount of Olives and the Temple Mount. And so here's the Mount of Olives, here's the Temple Mount, and it goes down into a valley. That valley is called the Valley of Kidron. And so many, many, many things are associated with this valley. And there was a spring that ran through the Kidron. So one of the monuments in this valley is called the Monument of Avshalom. And it is still there. I'm just going to hold up a picture that this is what it looks like. And it's still there today in the valley. Like up here is the Mount of Olives. Up here is the Temple Mount. And this building still exists. And this is Avshalom. He is the, a second. He is the son of David, who rebelled against him. And it's written that Avshalom at a certain point understood, for whatever reason, that he would not have a son to continue after him. And so he built this monument kind of like, don't forget me. I won't have someone to carry on my name. And apparently, when he built it, he put a hand. That's why it's called Yad Avshalom. He put the figure of a hand. And there is a tradition, it's not clear, but some say it was Napoleon, that when Napoleon came to Israel, and he passed by Avshalom, and he saw this hand. He had it broken because he said, any son who rebels against his father, his hand should be cut off. It's not sure it was Napoleon. It's not sure who it was, but at some point, someone did knock off the hand of Avshalom. So this is in the valley of Kidron. Now, this valley continues. And there's another, I'm just going to show you, this still exists today. There is like a cave with 3 pillars, kind of like carved into the stone of the mountain, going up to the Mount of Olives. And this is called, it's called the shelter of Uzziah. Now, who is Uzziah? It's actually called Beit HaChofshit, the house of freedom. And it's connected to a story that we learned about in the book of Malachim, that he apparently was a good king of Yehuda, but he didn't stop certain actions of the people that he had the power to stop. And so it says in the text that he was smitten with leprosy, and in a way he could not continue to be the king. And it says in the text that he retreated to a house and he lived in isolation till he died. And according to tradition, it's that place with the 3 pillars. And it was called Beit HaChofshit because there he was freed from the burden of being the king. But we don't want to lose focus that this is a valley that's running between the Mount of Olives and the Temple Mount. Now, and it's going from north to south. When it moves towards the south, it like turns towards the to the west. And when it turns towards the west, so different names are given. In other words, it's such a significant valley and so many things happened in it. According to tradition, this is where the Assyrian army, if you remember, at the time of Yechezkel, Sennacherib had 180,000 troops surrounding Jerusalem. And apparently most of them were in this valley of Kidron. And one morning, everyone got up and all the soldiers were dead. And Sennacherib fled and he went back to Assyria. So this valley has many, as we're seeing, many historical events happened. But as the valley turns towards the west, it begins to turn towards where the original city of David was. And this is very, very significant because we're told in those days there was water running through this valley. And where it starts to turn, there it gets another name, and that is Emek Yehoshaphat. Yehoshaphat means the first letters, Yeho, are the first 3 letters of God's name. Shaphat is judged. And so this is connected to a prophecy by Yoel. And he says, for behold, in those days, and in that time, when I bring back the captivity of Yehuda, which means hopefully our time, I will gather all the nations, and I will bring them down into the valley of Yehoshaphat, and I will enter into judgment with them there. Let the nations be stirred up and come up to the valley of Yehoshaphat, for there will I sit to judge all the nations around about. So it's not only the prophecy of Yoel. Zechariah also talks about it. It's actually the Haftarah, the first day of Sukkot. We'll get to that on the Mount of Olives, that God will come down on the Mount of Olives during the last battle. And that's where the mountain splits in half. And that's connected to this river flowing out of the Temple Mount. So a number of the prophets felt that this valley between the Mount of Olives and Jerusalem would be a significant place in the future for God's judgment of the nations. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to be said about all of this. And then, again, as the valley turns, so it gets another name also, Emek HaCharutz, which is also connected to the prophecy of Yoel. So he says multitudes in the valley, multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of God is near in the valley of decision. So that's what it's called, Emek HaCharutz. So again, this whole area is like full of great significance in the past and in the future. Now, if you continue, again, then it goes around to where the original city of David was. And between the city of David and the walls of Jerusalem today, there's another valley. It's really a continuation. And this is where we're now in the west of Jerusalem, where the new city of Jerusalem, western Jerusalem is, but there's a valley there. And this is leading, for those who know, towards Jaffa Gate, Shar Yafo. But it's in a valley. And that valley was originally called Gay Ben Hinnom, because that was the name of the person, Ben Hinnom, who had a farm there, a plantation there, whatever. But this place, this valley, became known as a place of idol worship, and especially the idol called Moloch. Now, this idol is mentioned in the Torah a number of times. And of all of the idol worship, it was considered like the worst because it was child sacrifice, or making children pass through fire. It was part of the service of this god. And the Torah warns a number of times how despicable these practices were. But apparently they happened in this valley. And so the name Gay ben Hinnom became known as Gehenna, Gehenna, which is the Hebrew word for hell, because at least metaphorically, hell is associated with fire. In our tradition, it's more the fire of purification, more than the fire of punishment. Nonetheless, this valley, which still exists there today. So when you go to Yerushalayim, these places, these valleys still exist. And like I said, each one of them had its own special name depending on the history. Okay, now going back to the Kidron, as I mentioned, this was a place of water. And so right by the city of David, there was a spring called Gihon. Now, interestingly enough, one of the 4 rivers that go out from Eden was called Gihon. And that's what this spring was called. And this spring was the water source for ancient Jerusalem. And so these waters of Gihon were very, very important. Tzidkiyahu, the king Tzidkiyahu, so he was the one who made these tunnels to bring the water into the walls of Jerusalem. Because when there's no enemy, there's no problem going out the gates of Jerusalem, going to the water source. But when you're surrounded by an enemy, you needed water inside. So Tzidkiyahu, he created the tunnel, and it was hewn through the mountain into the ancient city of David. Now this has a name to this day, and that is Shiloach. And in fact, the Arab neighborhood that is in the area of the ancient city of David to this day is called Shiloach. And that is where the incredible archaeological dig has been going on for 30, 40 years, and it's revealed good parts of the ancient city of David, including the water tunnel. And that's why in Israel, school children inevitably are taking on a tiyul, and you actually walk through the water tunnel. Everyone is told to bring your water shoes, and it's this incredible experience because it still exists. It still exists. Now, the waters of this tunnel had also, again, it's called the Fountain of Gihon, but it also had another name called the Mei Shiloach, the Brechat HaShiloach, because Shiloach means from the word a shaliach, a messenger. So here the idea is that this tunnel bringing the water in was conducting, was like a messenger. The tunnel was the messenger to get the water inside. So it's called the Mei Shiloach. And what's interesting is that a very, very famous Hasidic sefer is called Mei Shiloach. and it's become very, very popular in the last 30, 40 years. And it was one of Reb Shlomo's very favorite Sfarim. He learned from the Myrrh Shiloach all of the time. And this place of the Brecha of the Shiloach, this is where Shlomo HaMelech was anointed king. And it's written in the book of Malachim. That was the place that he was anointed. And I remember we learned that there is a tradition, and it really started with Shlomo HaMelech. There's a tradition that a king should be anointed by a body of water, by a river, a stream. And the reason is just like the stream flows, the blessing is that the lineage of this king will continue to flow forever. And in a certain way it has, because we're waiting for Mashiach ben David. We're waiting for the ultimate son of David. So the stream has continued to flow until now. Okay, I'm going to go a little bit longer because I really want to finish this. And so we're going to just finish with the Mount of Olives and Mount Scopus. Now, of course, we haven't dealt with every geographical sign of Yerushalayim, but I hope we've given a good feeling. So let's go back to the Mount of Olives. And the Mount of Olives to this day it's connected because there's a tradition that along with Mashiach coming, there'll be what's called Techiyat HaMetim, the resurrection of the dead. And there was a tradition that the resurrection of the dead would begin on the Mount of Olives. And so that became for generations the ideal place to be buried. And so to this day, the Mount of Olives is covered with ancient graves. Many of them have been covered over. The Arabs built on top of them, but they're still there. And then what happened after the Six-Day War in 1967, they started to try to clean up the whole area. And there is now a modern cemetery, kind of like on the other side as it starts to go down towards the Dead Sea. And there's now thousands of people buried there. But for a while, it was considered not that safe because it's in what's called Arab Jerusalem. And so it was problematic. But over the last around 10 years, Israel has really taken control of that area. They put a police station there and much more of a Jewish presence and security. And so now many people are using it now for burial again. And in fact, just this week when I was preparing this, there was an article in the Jerusalem Post that they just finished the first floor of a major educational center at the very top of the Mount of Olives that will tell the whole history and will also make it much more safe for people to go. I myself have gone to a number of burials in the Mountain of Olives. So like I said, there is this tradition that the resurrection of the dead will begin in the Mount of Olives. Now, of course, it got the name the Mount of Olives because at the time, it must have been full of olive trees. Today, there are not that many left because, as I said, a lot of it has been built, but that's how it got its name, because it was obviously a place of olives. Now, again, going back to the prophecy of Zechariah, and this is the Haftorah from the first day of Sukkot, where Zechariah says, "Behold, the day of the Lord is coming, and his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives," says it explicitly, "which is before Jerusalem on the east." It even says specifically, "And the Mount of Olives shall be cleft in the midst towards the east and towards the west." Some say this will be a major earthquake that will occur, so that there will be a very great valley that will open up when the mountain splits in half, and half of the mountain shall be moved towards the north, and half of it towards the south, not east and west. Now the valley between Mount of Olives and the Temple Mount is north to south. But here it's talking about it's splitting from east to west. And also from the north to the south. Now I'm going to go back. The mountain will be cleft from the east towards the west, but then it will refigure, and half of the mountain shall remove towards the north and half of it to the south. And and you will flee to the valley, and it shall come pass on that day that living waters shall go out from Jerusalem. And it's missing some of the words here, but it ends with, and on that day, God will be king over the whole earth. And that's how we end our services every day in the Aleinu. V'ne'amar v'haya b'yom hahu Hashem Melech al kol ha'oretz b'yom hahu yiyeh Hashem echad u'shmo echad. From Zechariah. But it's happening on the Mountain of Olives. Okay, so now another important idea is that outside of Israel, so the tradition is, and I know this because my wife served on the Chevra Kadisha when we were in Denver. The Chevra Kadisha are those people who deal with a dead body and prepare it for a holy kosher burial. And there's all kinds of laws and traditions and that go along with it. And one of them is that some earth from Eretz Yisrael is put in the casket. Now you have to know that here in Israel, people are buried directly in the ground, no casket, because it's considered holy land. But outside of Israel, people are buried in caskets, and in the casket is put earth from Israel. And originally, it was earth from the Mount of Olives, because of the tradition that the resurrection of the dead would occur there. And so the Talmud says, well, what happens if someone is buried outside of Israel? if the resurrection is happening in Israel, how are people going to get there? And so they say that God will create tunnels under the earth, through the earth, and bring people from all over the world back to Israel for the resurrection. But I wanted to mention this idea of putting some of the earth from the Holy Land. I don't know if it's still that it has to be from the Mount of Olives, but that minhag began from the earth from the Mount of Olives. So I want to end with, again, here you have the Mount of Olives. Here you have the Temple Mount. So this is east and west. What I mentioned before, when Avram came from the south, he came like this way. I see that you might not get the idea from my hand movements, but Avram came from the south. And that's where this Tayelet opens up this incredible view of Jerusalem. Now, if you go on the north side, the Mount of Olives curves to the north. Same mountain. And that's called the Mount Scopus, HaTzofim. Now, we've had that word before. Tzofim is it's the same root as tzfat. Tzofim means like a lookout, a place to see the view. Because on the north side of the city, you have just as spectacular a view of all of Jerusalem from the north. And like I said, really Jerusalem is built on these series of hills. So when you're on the far south and the far north, you get a sense of the rolling hills of Jerusalem. Now I know I've gone to the Tayelet many times, but not that often. But on Mount Scopus is the Hebrew University, one of the two branches of the Hebrew University. And for about around 15 years, I taught once a week at Mount Scopus to the students who were in Israel for a year at the university. And I taught it was called Beit Knesset Hecht, the Hecht Beit Knesset. And as we know, we usually turn to prayer towards the Temple Mount. And usually in the front of the shul is usually a wall with the Aron Kodesh. Well, this Beit Knesset was a little bit unique because instead of a wall, it had a window. And from the window, you look directly onto the Temple Mount. It was really quite incredible. But anywhere on Mount Scopus that you go, you can see this incredible view of Jerusalem. So that's the name of it, is Mount Scopus for that reason. Now, what's interesting is Mount Scopus is a mount, but when you look towards the east, see, when you're on Mount Scopus, you're looking more towards the south. But on the other side of Mount Scopus is where the descent begins all the way down to Jericho. So that is, in a certain way, like the border of Jerusalem, even though right outside of Jerusalem, that whole part of Jerusalem is what's called Arab Jerusalem. But not more than 6 or 8 kilometers is the settlement of Ma'ale Adumim. Ma'ale Adumim now has 30, I'm just guessing, 40,000 people. And it's quite controversial, very political, but Israel wants to connect Ma'ale Adumim with Jerusalem. and build to connect it. But I'm just mentioning on the other side of Mount Scopus, there's actually a big amphitheater that many famous events happen at this amphitheater. But when you look from the amphitheater, you're looking you're looking towards Jordan. You see the mountains of Jordan, and it's the drop all the ways to Jericho. So I'm sorry, we've gone a bit longer, but I wanted to get through as much as I could of the spiritual geography of Jerusalem. Like I said, there's much more, but hopefully we got a sense of the mountains, the hills, the valleys, the springs, the caves. This is the geography of Jerusalem, and I bless everyone to be able to come and to see for yourself.